Dr. Hill, good morning. We are at the bottom of Lamed Chesed base. And yesterday, we were discussing Rav Papa's categorization of the three extra zrikos of a chata. So we know, according to Basil, only one zrika is mandatory. The remaining three, you're supposed to do arba matanis or arba karnas hamizbeach, but if you didn't, the carbon is nisratza anyway. And we learned that the additional zrikas are required, but not mandatory. So the Gemara was probing as to did they have a din of a real zrika, or did they have a din of not a real zrika? So Rav Papa categorized it for us, and he told us how these three extra zrikas, how they react to different scenarios. So Rav Papa says, Yesh mehen ketchilasai, there are certain features where these three zrikas are like the original zrika, and v'yesh men kesoifai. But there are some ways in which this zrika, these three zrikas are extra, and they're not like a real zrika. For example, the list of items that make these zrikas like the regular original zrika is chutz, meaning if you spritz this blood out of the Beis Hamikdash, there's a chiv course like shchutei chutz that would only apply to a real avodah. A laila, we know you're not allowed to do avodah by night. These extra zrikas you're also not allowed to do by night. Zoris, we know only a kohen kosher can do zrika, and that includes these three extra zrikas as well. Ulchalei sharis, we know that the dam may only be in the klei sharis. Keren, we know that where do you spritz this blood? On the keren of the mizbech, the etzba, and it's done with the finger of the kohen, not with the keli. Kibos, and that's going to be the subject of today's Gemara. Kibos, the halacha is dam dacharoyul is rika. If it falls on the beged, the Torah says the beged has to be washed out. So this dam that we're going to do the three extra rikas with, if that dam drips on the beged would have to be washed. V'shirayim, as well is they make shirayim, meaning that the rest of their dam gets poured down to the Yosy Mizbech. Let's just see Rashi to double check that I'm right about shirayim. Shirayim chatas shekibel dama ba'arba koshos. Yeah, that's what it means. If you had a chatas that you were mekabel dam in 4 koshos, and you did one matana from each kosh, the shirayim of each one of the koshos, even the extra 3 zrikas, gets poured down to the Yosy Mizbech. In that respect, they're like regular zrikas ketchilasah. But misa, we know the halacha is that once the owner of the korban chatas dies, you cannot do the zrika anymore. That's only with the first zrika. The 3 additional zrikas you'd be able to do even though the owner died, because the ritzui was there. So in that respect, these zrikas aren't like the main zrika. And loy shari, normally the zrikas matter the meat, either be placed on the mizbeach or to be eaten by the owner of the korban or the kohen. These 3 zrikas aren't matter anything, because after the first zrika, the korban was already muter lebezbeach and muter to the kehanim. And v'loy mefadla, if someone had a machshav of pigel during one of these 3 zrikas, but they already had done the first zrika bekashrus, that korban can no longer become pigel. Again, it's a way in which it's not like a regular zrika. And v'loy ayla legavoy, the halacha is that if you have dam that you want to spritz on the mizbeach, and that dam goes inside the heichal, that dam becomes possible for zrika. This dam, if it came in to the heichal, it wouldn't become possible as zrika. So that's kasoifan, meaning it's like a post zrika zrika. It's not really like an original zrika that would become possible. So here Rav Papa laid out all these different categories where these 3 extra zrikas are like a real zrika or not. Amar Papa Mina Aminullah. And Rav Papa is focusing on one item on this list. Mina and Minullah, how do I know about this halach of kibos? That even if blood from the 3 remaining zrikas, even if the blood that you're going to use for the 3 remaining zrikas falls on the beged, the Torah will still machayev you to wash that beged. How do I know that? Itnan, I know it from a Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, Nites minat saver al habeged. What happens if dam went straight from the neck of the behema onto a beged. Now that's not dam that's royally zrika, because we all know first there has to be a kabbalah's dam in a klisharis, and then and only then can you make the zrika. So if the dam came straight from the neck of the behema onto a beged, that would be dam that's not royal to be spritzed on the mizbeach, and therefore einay ton kibus, that dam does not have to be washed out. What about mina keren? You already spritzed it on the keren, so it no longer needs a zrika. Then you have to, again, it doesn't need kibus, or umina yisoid. Or what if, never mind, you make zrika, you've already poured shirayim to the yisoid, and that's when the dam went on someone's beged. Einay ton kibus. Why? Because these are not dam that's destined to be spritzed. But we could be medayik. Davka minha keren is discharged, and therefore, if the dam falls on your beged, you don't have to wash it out. Hamina royal keren. But what if you didn't spritz it yet? You're supposed to spritz it. You're supposed to spritz it sometime in the future, such as not only the first matan of dam, but the 3 remaining matanas of dam. They're royal keren, because that's what the halacha says. That's what the Torah says. You're supposed to do with it. You're supposed to spritz it on the karnei hamizbeach. So mashma that dam, if it went on your beged, would be ton kibus. So zokt your papa, I have a mishnah that supports my shita, that this dam that you're going to be using with the 3 extra zrikas is called regular dam zrika lagabe the alocha of kibus. Beautiful. That was your papa's raya, but it's not so simple at all. What the Gemara here is going to say that yes, you have a raya from this mishnah, but this raya is a shitas yochid. It's not mainstream. We're looking for a raya that the mainstream mishnah holds like Rav Papa. So if you're going to make a deal, mina yisoid and yitzar kibus, hamina royal yisoid toin kibus. If you're going to make a dik of mina keren, so then let me make the same dik of minha yisoid. Mina yisoid and yitzar kibus. If it's already on the yisoid, hamina royal yisoid. If it's dam that you already spritzed on the mizbeach, and now it's shirayim, and now you're supposed to pour it on the yisoid, ton kibus, are you going to say that needs kibus? No, the same dik from where you extracted that this extra dam that's royal le keren is going to require kibus. If I make that same dik from the words of the Mishnah that says umina yisoid, then I would conclude that even dam after zrika needs kibus because it's royal yisoid. It's now supposed to be poured on the yisoid, and we know that's not true because the pasuk says asher yazik sev davka dam that's destined to be spritzed. Dam that's destined to the yisoid is clearly dam that has already been spritzed. Prat lozeh shekvar huza zok to Gemara. I'll tell you pshat in this mishnah. In this mishnah actually holds that even dam that's on its way to the yisoid is still considered active dam, but it's a shitas yochid. Hamani Rab Nechemia. This must be going according to Rab Nechemia. That's done. Rab Nechemia Omer shiyarei hadam she'akrivim b'chutz chayev. Now Rab Nechemia didn't directly address kibos, but he said another important information about shiyarei dam. Shiyarei dam, you've already discharged its need to make zrika, and now you're supposed to be pouring it on the yisoid. What if you poured it on the yisoid of a mizbech outside of the azara? That's also called shchutei chutz. So clearly, Rab Nachman holds that this is still dam that's active. That's dam in play. So therefore, if we see Rab Nechemia said that this is dam that's in play, let's stretch and say it's also dam that's in play, and therefore, if it falls on your beged, you have to wash it out. Zok to Gemara, you're connecting 2 different halachas, but how can you be so sure that they're connected? Anywhere the shamas leiler Rab Nechemia le'inyan ha'alah. Yes, if you take this dam after you spritzed it and you put it on the mizbeach, that's chutz, there'll be an isser of chutz. There'll be an isser of shchutei chutz. Because you find, even after the heter zrika, there are still ways to be oivrish shchutei chutz. For instance, midi dahava a'ivarim upedarim. The halacha is, after zrika sadam, if you took the ivarim and you put them on the mizbeach chutz la'azara, that's also called an isser of shchutei chutz. So maybe the dam will also still be in play. But leading kibus mishamasle, how do you know that Rab Nechemia, this Shitas Yochid, how do you know that the Shitas Yochid of Rab Nechemia also holds that there would be a Chiyuv Kibos on Dam that already had been spritzed on the Mizbeach and now was going to the Yosy? Zok to Gemara in, as a matter of fact, we do have a proof that Rab Nechemia even said his halacha in a case of Dam that was spritzed and that's going to the Yosy, that it wouldn't need Kibos. Where do you see he said that? From a Mishnah that doesn't have a author, that the Mishnah doesn't identify its author, from a Stam Brisa. What does the Stam Brisa say? But Tanya, we look in the Brisa, Damim hatu unin Yosy, any dam that needs to go to the Yosy, meaning it's already post Zrika, the exact case that we're discussing, it says to unin kibos. It will be, if it goes on a beged, you don't have to wash out that beged. And umachshava moy elas bahen. If you add a machshava of pigel by putting the blood on the Yosy, it would passel. Now that's very schwer because we learned unequivocally that once the dam is spritzed, even the first matan of dam, we could no longer make this carbon pigel. Yet here it's saying that even after this rika, dam on the way to the Yosy is going to be able to be made pigel. That's a question that the Gemara is going to assume. Which is what we heard from Rabbi Nechemia just a moment ago. The dam that's already nizrak, that you're pouring on to the side of the mizbeach. If you did that outside, you'd be chayav al shchutei chutz. That's damim haturin yisoid. V'damim hanishbochen la'ama. What if it's dam that's puzzle, and because of that you're putting it into the drainage channel, into the amma? So that's not dam at all, and it has no halachas of dam. Therefore, ein tunin kibos, bein machshav moyelos behen, v'hamayla mehen b'chutz poter. So let's analyze who could possibly be the author of this brisa that doesn't have an author. Man shamas lei the Omar Maila Mehen b'chutz chayiv. Which Tana do we know for sure said that if you took this dam after the Zrika, it's headed to the Yosy, and you brought it outside the Beis Hamikdash to put it on the Mizbeach there, you'd be chayiv al shchutei chutz. There's only one Tana that we can identify that says this, and that's Reb Nechemia, because we just quoted Reb Nechemia at the bottom of the base. And this brisa also says the ka'amar ton kibus umachshav ton kibus. Period. So it must be that this brisa that we just quoted is going according to Reb Nechemia, and Reb Nechemia not only holds that the dam headed to Shiraim you could be chayv al shchutei chutz. He also holds that the dam that's headed to the Yisod Mizbeach, dam that Shiraim, if it goes on your beged, it's ton kibus. So therefore, yes, you had a good raya from a Mishnah on Amud Beis, that there is a Tana that holds ton kibus by the dam that's on its way to the Keren, right? We're talking about the other three matans of dam. Yes, you have a raya that from a Mishnah that says we ton kibus, but that Mishnah was authored by Reb Nechemia. If you want a raya to your papa, you need to bring a raya from more than just Reb Nechemia, because clearly Reb Nechemia is what we would call a fringe opinion. Nobody holds like that, other than Reb Nechemia. So your raya is not a good raya. Now the Gemara is a little bit, has its attention diverted. We're going to put the raya to Reb Papa aside, and now the Gemara is struggling with whether or not we have right pshat in this brisa. So the Gemara just suggested that this brisa is going according to Reb Nechemia. The case of the brisa is a regular case of a carbon where the dam was already nizrak and it's on its way to the Yosod. And there, what does Reb Nechemia seem to be saying? Many halachas. A is it's tu'un kibus, which is the R of Nechemia. Machshav me'elos ben, which is a shvera shita, because how could you have a machshavas pigel after the zrika? And v'maylam b'chutz chayiv, which we know is Reb Nechemia's shita. So, frank the Gemara, we got a big problem with learning that this brisa is going in the case of dam that shirayim, and it's going according to Reb Nechemia. Because umachshava moy elos behen, how could you say even in Reb Nechemia that you can have a machshava pigel in dam after the drink already? But Tanya, we learned yotzu shirayim v'aktaras emurin she'ein ma'akvin es hakapara. Pouring the dam, the shirayim and the dam to the Yisod Mizbeach, or being makter emurim on the Mizbeach. Even if you had a machshava pigel during these two activities, she'ein machshava moy elos behen. Why? Because that's not part of the Ritzuya carbon. And therefore, once the Ritzuya carbon has already been completed, this carbon can no longer become pigel. So everybody agrees that there's no such thing as dam that's already nizrak, a machshava of pigel should be mayelas. So you can't possibly have right pshat in the brisa that we just learned above, because it's impossible to say that there's a Tana out there that would hold that machshava is mayelas ben to make pigel on dam that has already been nizrak. So because of that, we have to go back to the drawing board. We have to have a new pshat in this brisa, and it's not what we think it is. It cannot be speaking about dam that was already nizrak, because there's no way at all to ever say that dam that was already nizrak you could have a machshavas pigel. So zok to Gemara, Kitan Yahi. Where is this brisa? Where does the ein machshav mel shvin? Oh, so he brings a brisa. V'atan yatsu shiraim. V'aktor shem word. Shein ma'akvin sekavara.
You're saying that the brisa says machshav mayelas.
Oh, where it says machshav mayelas is the second line from the top of our Amud. Dam matunin yisoid, tunin kibus, umachshav mayelas ben. So there's no way you could say that pshat in this brisa is a standard case of Reb Nechemia, a regular case where the dam was already nizrak and now you're about to pour it on the yisoid, because there's no way you could say machshav mayelas, because everybody agrees that pigel could only happen before the carbon was nisratza. Once the carbon was nisratza, that ship has sailed. It's never happening. So you have wrong pshat in this brisa. So you know what pshat in the brisa is? It's speaking about exactly our case, where you had one matana was already spritzed, and there's still 3 additional matanas dam that have to be spritzed, but that's only lechatchila, not b'di'evet. So zok to Gemara, hi tanyo ahi b'shalosh matanosh shevachatos. Okay, so let's try it on. Let's read the brisa with that assumption. Domim hatu'unin yisoid. Domim that need yisoid. Now that's a problem right away, because dom hatu'unin yisoid sounds very much like it was already spritzed. But we'll put that aside for now. It's referring to dam that you're about to spritz. After you spritz the first matana of dam, you're going to be spritzing now another 3 matanos. So the halach is to unin kibus. If that dam went on your baggage, you need kibus. That's good. That's a premier. A papa holds like that too, right? It would make it pigel, right? We actually had a shaila if it would make it pigel, because we had a shaila. Is this dam? We actually said it wouldn't be make. We actually said earlier it wouldn't make pigel because there was already ritzi, right? But this is what the brisa says. Now, ma'alim b'chutz would be chayiv, which stems with what Rav Papa said. Now, ma'alim b'chutz is chayiv. He said it is chayiv, but he said it wouldn't make pigel. But maybe this is not Rav Papa, right? Maybe this is a different shita. But that's more palpable to say that it's speaking about dam that you already made zrika. So let's have a look how that fits in. Let's say that this brisa is speaking about shalosh matana shevachatos. But Frank Gemara, ihachi tu'unin yisoid. What do you mean tu'unin yisoid? What do you mean they're on their way to the yisoid? They're not on their way to the yisoid. La keren asli. These 3 zrikas need to be spritzed on the keren, not on the yisoid. So how could you say that how could the brisa use the words, the description of a tu'unin in the yisoid to describe 3 zrikas that are going to be done on the mizbeach? It just means they're in the track that would lead them eventually to the yisoid, meaning it's still active dam. As Rashi says, nit'anin yisoid, mitzvahs te'inas yisoid alayim, because sheshayfich shireim yisoid. Because this dam, after you spritz it on the keren, the shiraim will have to go to the yisoid. So that's what it's talking about. That's already not such a shmaka pshat, because it already doesn't fit so good in the lashon, but we're trying to find a solution. Are you going to tell me that the dam from the additional 3 zrikas, if you had a machshav of pigel, it would become pigel? Ha'amrit, we just said earlier, loy shari v'loy mefagla. Rabbi said it's not matir the basar, and it's not mefagel, and v'loy ayla legavoy. And additionally, if this dam came into the hechel, it wouldn't possibly kisoifan, like blood that has already been spritzed. So once again, the pshat to say that this brisa is talking about those 3 bloods are shaila exactly, again, is not acceptable, because these piskei halacha that the brisa offers are simply incompatible with this case. Ella, now we're going to have a third try in understanding the brisa that we just quoted at the top of them. Elakitanya hi b'damim hapenimim. Now we have a whole new pshat. You know what dam we're talking about? Dam that has to be spritzed on the mizbech hapnimi. Now we already learned that dam that has to be spritzed on the mizbech hapnimi, if even one matana is missing, the carbon will be puzzled. And we even had a shita who held that you also have to pour the dam onto the soda mizbech hachitzon. If not, the carbon will be puzzled. So now let's have a look. I mean, this could even be referring to dam of a chatas hapnimi that you didn't spritz on the side, according to the Talmud holds that that's also ma'akiv. That dam is to unin kibus and machshava me'elos ben and v'maylam and bechutz is chayiv. You know why? Because it's active dam. The korban didn't have its ritzui up until the point that the dam is poured on the side. So now we have a geshmak pshat in the brisa. The problem is the next part of the brisa. The brisa then continues and says, "V'damim hanishbachim la'ama." That's completely dead blood, inactive, and it doesn't have any halachas of blood. So let's see how that works out over here. So which means the brisa will agree to me that by damim hachitzayin, by a regular chatos, where the dam is spritzed on the mizbech hachitzayin, my potter. The halacha would be that it would be potter, meaning what would the halacha be? All these three things. It would not require kibbutz because it's already post shrika. You would say ein machshava ma'elos behen. Why? Because we already discharged with the first shrika. We discharged the carbon and therefore cannot become pigel anymore. And v'maylam and bechutz would not be chayiv. It would be potter. So that's going to be the halacha by damim hachitzonim. So frank to Gemara, why did the brisa have to go to a case of damim hanishbachim la'ama? The brisa wants to show two contrasting cases: a case where all these 3 points would be chayiv, compared to a case where all these three things were potter. So why did the brisa have to run to such a faraway case as a case of damim hanishbachim la'ama? Dam that became possible, and because of that, totally disqualified, and that doesn't have the halach of dam. The Mishnah should have said a much bigger chiddush. The brisa should have said a much bigger chiddush. Live like v'lista b'didah. Where do we say that dam is to unin kibus and machshava moyelos behen and v'amaylim bechutz is chayiv? That's b'dam hapnimim. That applies to active blood of a carbon chatos hapnimi, but by active blood of a carbon chatos hachitzoni, all these three things would be potter. So once again, we have a problem. The way you're learning the Mishnah is speaking by dam from a chatos hapanimi. Why didn't the contrasting case, the second case of the brisa that says paturim, why did we run to a case of dam that's completely possible, that's about to be poured down the drain? Why didn't the Tana say a greater chiddush that the dam of a regular carbon chatos, a chatos chitzoni, that was already spritzed, that discharges and all three things are potter? Zok to Gemara, for that I can answer Hamani Rab Nechemi. Rab Nechemi is a shidduch yochid who holds that dam that's headed to the Yosy. There's still a chiyuv of shchutei chutzon, and there's still ton kibus. So what did Reb Nechemi say? Shiori Adam shakrivim b'chutz would be chayiv. So we were trying to make a contrast. What do we say? It doesn't have that chumrah. It doesn't have that chumrah. And b'chutz is potter. It doesn't have the third mile either. According to Reb Nechemia, the third mile you cannot say. You could say, but v'domim from a chatos hachitzayin, we could say ain't tunin kibbutz, because we don't have a mufurish brisa that says what Rabbi Nechemi holds about kibbutz. You could also say in machshava me'elos ben, because once the drika is done and the carbon is kosher, there's no more possibility of making it pigel. But you cannot say v'amaylim and b'chutz potter, because according to Rabbi Nechemia, even dam after this rika that's headed to Shiraim, that's headed to the Yosy, would be chayiv if you do it b'chutz. So according to Reb Nechemia, if this brisa is Reb Nechemia, which we want to say it had to go to a case of Damah Nishpachim La'ama to be able to find a case that would be potter in all these three halachas. Because according to Reb Nechemia, if we were speaking about a chatos hachitzoini, this third tour wouldn't be there, and that's why the brisa dafka chapped in the case of Damim Hanishpachim La'ama. Beautiful. So now what we have over here is Hamani Reb Nechemia Dam Shiyari Adam Shakiv Mechutz Chayiv. And therefore, the Brisa wouldn't have been able to make that contrast and show that in all these three instances it's potter, because in one of the instances it will be chayiv. So we picked the case of dam that's going to the amma, which all three cases it would be potter, and it would be a nice parallel contrast. Now, where are we holding? We got shot in a Brisa that's not relevant to us. We're still focused. Where do we have a right for a puppet? Or Papa was trying to bring a raya that if you have a chatos and you spritzed one of the zrikas already, and now you have dam with which you're going to spritz the additional zrikas, if that dam went on your beged, you have to wash it out. We still don't have a makar. We tried bringing a raya from a brisa, but the Gemara said that has to be Reb Nechemia, so we still haven't found a mainstream makar for Rav Papa. So Zok Ravina, I'm going to solve that problem. And let's go back to the brisa that we originally wanted to use, or the mishnah that we wanted to originally use for our papa, and let's see the problem we ran into, and let's see if we can resolve that problem. Amar papa mina aminullah. So I'm back on Lamed Chesamid base. How do I know that this dam, if it went on a beged, you'd have to wash it out? The Tanan we learned in the mishnah. Nitaz mina tzavar ala beged ein ta'in kibus mina keren. Doesn't need kibbutz. Haroy Karen needs kibbutz, right? That's what we wanted to bring the raya. But the problem is we ran into a problem when we learned Mina Yisoid. Mina Yisoid ain't on kibbutz. That's a problem, because we know that if you want to make the dik of Mina Yisoid doesn't need kibbutz, but on its way to the Yisoid does need kibbutz. That's Reb Nechemia, right? That was the problem we ran into. Zok Ravina, I have a very simple way to learn this brisa. Just don't make that same dik by Mina Yisoid, and then all your problems are solved. What do I mean by that? Zok Ravina. Let me tell you how to touch this price. Mina Karen is a Mina Karen mamish. Meaning, if it's off the Karen already, then it will not need kibbutz and will make a diak. Hamina royal Karen, if it's the three matnas dam that you're still going to be putting on the Karen, those would require kibbutz. But Mina Yisoid, don't touch it as Mina Yisoid mamish. Touch Mina Yisoid as Mina royal Yisoid. If the dam is royal to the Yisoid, meaning it's post Zrika, that dam doesn't need kibbutz. Now you're going to ask me, it's a little bit of a modna way. Why would we learn that it's not parallel, right? Why would you know it's not parallel? The answer is Okrashi is because think about it. If we said that Mina Karen ain't tzarch kibbutz, right? Meaning once it left the Karen, once you did the Zrika, it doesn't need kibbutz. Why in the world would I need a Tana to tell me if it's Shirayim ain't Torah Kibbutz? We already said once you put it on the Karen, once you made the Rika, doesn't need Kibbutz. So it's completely redundant for the Tana to repeat himself and say that after you pour the Shirayim, it doesn't need Kibbutz. So therefore, it makes sense to learn that the Mishnah is speaking about Mina royally aside to tell you that Shirayim doesn't need Kibbutz. But to tell you, even after you poured it on the aside, even after the Shirayim was already poured, even there it needs kibbutz, it doesn't make sense to learn that that's what the Tana is saying, because there's no chiddush in it. So therefore, we have good reason to interpret Mina Karen as mamish Mina Karen, haroyul Karen. But if it's blood that you're about to spritz on the Karen, that would be b'chayav kibbutz. But Mina Yasoid doesn't mean Mina Yasoid mamish, it means Mina royal Yasoid. After this Rika, once it's royal to go to the Yasoid, it's Shiyari Dam, that already would not need kibbutz. And now that Mishnah is telling us exactly what Rav Papa told us. That any dam that's headed to the Karen, even though the carbon was in Satz already with the first matana, but these three additional matanas are still headed to the Karen, the Torah says you're supposed to put them on the Karen, that dam will still have a chiyuv of kibbutz. Amr Rav Tachlifa, you're not out of the dark yet. Amr Rav Tachlifa bar Gazel Ravina. Why do you learn it like that? Ema idividi royu. Maskim by the Yisoid, you have to say royally Yisoid ain't tzarich kibbutz, right? But maybe you say the same thing by Karen. Mina Karen means if it's royal Karen, it does not need kibbutz, which would be against Rav Papa. Rav Papa said if it's royal Karen, it does get kibbutz. What? Right. So if it's royal Karen, so maybe what the Bryce is saying is when it says Mina Karen, just like when we're touching Mina Yosy means Mina royal Yosy, pre-poured. Maybe Mina Karen means maybe Mina Karen means pre-spritzed. Mina Karen pre-spritzed does not need kibbutz. What? Well, because maybe where Papa is wrong. Maybe in this respect, once the first Matan of Dam was given and the carbon was Ratzah, maybe Lagabi this, it's considered gespritzed already and it wouldn't need kibbutz, right? Where Papa was saying this Dam, these 3 extra Matanas, in certain ways they're like Dam that has to be spritzed, but in certain ways it's like Dam that was spritzed already. So maybe this falls into another category. They get tzarech kibbutz. And that's how you learn the Brisa. Zoktamar, it wouldn't make sense to learn the Brisa that way. Hi, my. Hashta royal Karen. Amrit. If you're going to learn that Karen means royal Karen, meaning this dam that you're mechuyev to make a zrika on it, yet it wouldn't be dam that would make a chiyuv kibbutz. That's how you're learning pshat in Mina Karen. Well, then, loy royally aside me boy. So why would I need a Tana to tell me that royally aside post zrika doesn't need kibbutz? Pre zrika doesn't need kibbutz. If you want to learn pshat in this brisa that is telling you pre zrika doesn't need kibbutz, surely post zrika doesn't need kibbutz. So because that you're forced to touch Mina Karen means Mina Karen mamish doesn't need kibbutz. Post zrika, but pre zrika needs kibbutz, just like what Rav Papa said. But Mina Yosy, you're going to have to touch that it means Mina royal Yosy, meaning even pre Yosy, dam that was already spritzed, that's now headed for the Yosy, because the Shirayim, that would not need kibbutz. Okay, so that's our makar to Rav Papa. So obviously, you in Svara, you strongly hold of Rav Papa's Svara that it should need kibbutz, because it's dam that's still muchiv to make shrik on. But we know that this dam has certain features of dam that was already discharged, such as you don't make pickle anymore, such as it's not marat to the bosser, right? The Mishnah said any dam that goes on the mizbech hapnimi, that dam, everything stated in the parasha has to be followed to the T, and if it's not followed to the T, the carbon is going to be possible. How do we know that from? Now we always know that unless there's two triggers to make something ma'akiv. One is by kachim, if the Torah repeats the halacha twice, that makes a ma'akiv. But there's another trigger we're going to learn, and that is if it says chukah. If it says a lashon of chukah in the parasha that's discussing the halacha, that also makes it that it's ma'akiv. So Tanu Rabbanan, it says also kasher also. If in parashas Tzav, where it discusses, goes to parashas Vayikra Dalet. So when the Torah discusses, there's a series of karbonos that come together, and that was chatas nosi, and then there's the par koyin HaMashiach, and then there's the par ha'ol b'avishal tzibur, and they're all listed. Their avoidus are all listed consecutively. So let's see what it says over here. It first starts in the parsha of Chatas. It says nefesh kisechto b'shkaga mikol mitzvah Hashem asher lo yisasena. And who's the first person that we're discussing in Makayin HaMashiach? So the first big major Chatas we're talking about is the Chatas of the Koyin HaMashiach. And what does it say? Very detailed description of what you have to do. Maybe it's a pearl for Hashem, v'samech l'jadoi, v'lokachem midam, v'tabel v'tzpoi midam, v'isa sheva pa'amim l'fnei Hashem, and after you spritz 7 times in the mizbeach, v'nos na'koyin min adam al karnis mizbach k'tor sasamim, which means pnimi. Oops, I think I just lost my camera. I think once I lose it, I lose it. That's how this works. We'll just go back there. Got my camera. Oh, I got my camera back. Okay. and then it says it's called chelev. So it's a very, very detailed description of exactly what is done with this animal. Now let's go to the par helam dover shel tzibur. And guess what? The Torah also goes in great detail describing what has to be done. The samchu, ve'vidam, the toval, uminadam mitin, first of all, sheva pamel from Hashem, all kinds of mizbeach, then yishboich, v'skol chelbo. It's literally going through everything. And then the pasuk says, after it already explained in detail, word for word, what we needed to do with the par kohen Mashiach, it says, "V'oso lapor kasher oso lapar chatos ken yasaloi." By the way, do what you did with the other one. And if you're going to say this, then why did you go through all the trouble of listing everything in detail? We already have all the details. After all the details, the Torah says, just copy, ditto, what we said a minute ago, legabi the par kohen Mashiach. So this pasuk is very much extra, because what halacha are we learning from this pasuk that the pasuk hasn't already explicitly stated? So that is what we're discussing. So, Frank the Gemara. What is it trying to teach you? It must be lichboil b'haza osoi. It's telling us a second tzivoy on hazah, which is why if it's an extra tzivoy, that makes it be maktiv. The limit, it teaches us shem chizer achas mikol hamatonos loy osav v'loy. Beautiful. Now we have a makar. It's stated twice. Right the Gemara. Einli elamatan sheva shema'aktiv. The chol. I only know that Matan Sheva, which is not on the Mizbeach, rather it's on the Paroiches, right? We said if he's off Paroiches 7 times, we only
he said to leave 2?
Because everywhere that you need Matan Sheva, it's Ma'akid. But Matan Dalit.
I'd like to. I don't know. Jeremy, we're okay with the 3 stage? You want only a 2?
On each of the Kronos of the Mizbeach.
Leave it.
How do you know that's Ma'akid?
I think you'd leave it.
This kasha that we just asked is a very
have one
kasha,
away, we'll take it.
Because the same way it listed it off, and it says also legabe the 7 shrikas, it says it's legabe the 4 shrikas. So why do the 4 shrikas need a special limit? With that tomorrow. But for now, let's just take the brisa in as it says. So for the 4 shrikas, for some reason, we need an extra pasuk to teach us that they're ma'akiv. Talmud Leimer in the same pasuk, Kain Yasa. From Kain Yasa, we say that not only are the 7 shrikas ma'akiv, the 4 shrikas are ma'akiv as well. This is lapar. So it says we also lapar kasher also lapar achatos. So kasher also lapar. What's that talking about? Ze par yoy makipurim. As Rashi says, the par Yom Kippur is also similar to par Hel and Dover Shel Tzibur. What halacha is
guitar at the center?
So now we have a word in the pasuk of par Hel and Dover Shel Tzibur. Kein Yasa Lapar, the par of Yom Kippurim will also have certain similarities that we'll discuss later. Okay, let's go on. Yes, a short amud in Zevachim. Yes, that happens. Kasher also Lapar Zeh. Kasher also lapar, I'm sorry. Kasher also lapar. Which extra word are we learning it from now? Zokt Rashi lav kasher also kadorish. So
nice. I've never been a roadie. I always wanted to be. I should have. I've done it for AB.
To add Pariyim Kippurim was from the Kain Yasa was from the first lapar. There's 2 lapars. It says Vayjes lapar. It says also lapar. Kasher also lapar. So there's also lapar, there's kasher also lapar. So the second lapar, what do we learn from that? Ze par kohen Mashiach. That's referring to par kohen Mashiach, meaning you need to follow whatever it says before. Ze par kohen Mashiach, hamar parsha yoyna v'lo nichpar. Kach kozar v'kishen yachad. So basically, the second parsha that we were reading is par al Dover Shel. It says all the details there, and it says
Yosy, Akiva, you're
also
off,
copy what it says earlier by the Par Kohen Mashiach. So that's a double tzivui for the Par Hel Dover Shel Tzibur. But this extra par says, and this double tzivui that makes it be ma'akiv, also apply back to your source. Also apply back to the Par Kohen Mashiach that all those matanos are ma'akiv as well. Okay, hachatos. What does hachatos mean? Because it says kasher also lapar hachatos. What is that referring to? Elu seirei avoidus kechofen. There are when Klal Yisrael does Avodah Zarah, they brought a special seir. It was also brought for all of Klal Yisrael. It also needs matanis dam inside on the mizbeach apnimi and on the paroiches. So there it's also ma'akiv. Zakimar Yochel Shani Mar Ba'av Seirei Haragolim, the Seirei Roshei Chadashim. There was a Seir Chatas that was brought on Yom Tov, and that was brought on Rosh Chodesh. Maybe over there as well, they are considered Chatois HaPnimius, because it doesn't say specifically what you do there. So maybe by those karbanos, you also have to spritz the blood on the Mizbech HaPnimi, and it's Ma'akiv. Talmud Loimar Loi. Vasisa Loi. This doesn't apply everywhere to all Chatois. It only applies to this exclusive list that we've been discussing. Why would you say that we're being marbe, but we're excluding and Sirei Avodas Kachavim, but we're excluding Sirei Regalim? Maybe do it the other way. Zaktamar, very simple. We have a riboy to include other karbonos in this rule that everything's ma'akiv and it's done b'pnimi. And you also have a meat of loy to tell you certain karbanos aren't included in this exclusive club. Mar banias elu shemachaprin alaveras mitzvah yudu. All the karbanos parkay Mashiach paral levshel sibur. Klal Yisrael did a very specific avera. We know about avera, and we're bringing a carbon specifically to correct an avera we know about. But the Siri Rosh Chodesh and the Siri Regalim we learned at the beginning of Masechta are here to be mechaper on unknown tumas. It's tumas mikdash v'kedoshim that no one knew about. So therefore, it's for an undefined avera. Al avera mitzvah yudua. Rather, it's just in case avera. If someone came in tamei and he didn't know that he was tamei, so those are not as severe karbanos. Those don't require these extra restrictions. V'chiper, because the pasuk says v'chiper alei nakayim v'nisnach lehem. V'chiper is aval pi shaloi samach. V'chiper tells you that although all these rikas are ma'akiv, smicha you're supposed to l'chtchila, but if you didn't do smicha, the carbon will be kosher. And v'nislach aval pi shaloi nasan shirayim. Even if you didn't pour shirayim to the yasoid, it would still be kosher. Obviously, this time it holds that shvicha shirayim l'yasoid is not ma'akiv. Why are you applying the pasuk to tell you that it's not ma'akiv to smich and shirayim, and the rem is that it is ma'akiv should be referring to zrikas? Maybe it's the opposite. Zaktimur, I'll tell you why. Amrit paisel ba'azois. You know why I want to paisel by azois? Shema'akvis b'chol makom. In all karbonis, if you don't make hazah, the carbon is paisel. Umach shani b'smicha v'shirayim. And I'm not going to passel with the Evid if smicha wasn't done or if shirayim wasn't done, because in other places you find, like by Chatayis HaChitzaynos, everybody agrees that smicha and shirayim would not be ma'akiv the carbon. Okay, so Baruch Hashem, we were to finish Daf Lamed Tes right to the bottom, and tomorrow we're going to start with Omar Mar. We're going to be dissecting this brisa line by line to understand all the different difficulties in it, like we raised on the way. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we're right on there.